Welcome, everyone, to Partner Up with Amy Carroll. As a communication coach, trainer, speaker, and author, I'm delighted to be your host and excited to bring you insights and ideas to help you solve your communication conundrums. This is the 28th episode of my show, Partner Up with Amy Carroll. If you want to find out more about me or what the show's about, feel free to listen to previous episodes on my website, carrollcoaching.com, or go directly to the VoiceAmerica.com business channel. Be sure to download the app or check it out wherever you like to listen to podcasts. Now, if you missed last week's show, I interviewed Matthias Hartmann, who is a somatic coach. Matthias calls himself the coach to call when life is calling for a change. We explored his embodied approach of digging deep in internal blockages of change and looking at the fear behind speaking in public. So be sure to check out that episode from last week. Today, my guest is Sarah Peyton. Welcome, Sarah.
Oh, Amy, thank you for having me.
So, Sarah, help me remember, I think you and I met for the first time, I want to say it was in Poland.
Yes.
About 4 or 5 years ago, I'm guessing.
I'm guessing that also.
Yeah, that's all it is. It's a guess. I remember the room, I remember the people, and it was a week-long constellation workshop, or several days at least, I know. Very intense. Yes. So, Sarah, before I start firing questions at you, I want to give the listeners some background so they know who you are and engage a bit more. We're going to be talking about what constellation work is. And before I do, let me give my listeners a background. So Sarah is a certified trainer of nonviolent communication, constellation facilitator, and neuroscience educator. Sarah integrates brain science and the use of resonant language to heal trauma and also to nourish self-warmth with exquisite gentleness. And I can tell you that I have been the recipient of that gentleness, and it is exquisite indeed.
Oh.
Sarah teaches and lectures internationally and is the author of the book, Your Resonant Self, Guided Meditations and Exercises to Engage Your Brain's Capacity for Healing. Her second book is titled Your Resonant Self Workbook. It's going to be published May 25th of this year, and it's already available for pre-order on Amazon. And in the fall, because Sarah's not busy enough, she's going to whip out another book, and this one's going to be Affirmations for Turbulent Times. Boy, that timing is good, Sarah.
Yeah, no kidding. The publisher got so excited about that one that they created an expedited schedule. I've never had them do a turnaround so fast. Yeah.
Like, yes, we all need it. Oh, that's great. Sarah offers trainings focused on learning and using resonant language to transform the brain. She brings together deep work and self-kindness, integrating relational neuroscience with the healing potential of relationship. Sarah, I got to stop and interrupt and ask you if you can explain what all of that means.
Sure.
Let me say this part, the integrating relational neuroscience with the healing potential of relationship. Go for it.
Well, what we know about trauma, so first of all, let's start with the idea that your brain is supposed to be a really good place to live.
Okay, fair enough.
And for many of us, it is a dangerous place filled with whirling knives and stabbing razors and slashing butcher knives. It's just like a nightmare to go in there. I mean, that's why so many of us spend so many hours, especially during COVID isolation time, tuned into Netflix because it's
scary movies on Netflix is a lot less scary than the brain.
That is right. It's a lot less scary than being alone with our brain. There is even some research where they put people into a room without their cell phone. And they said it was a research study, and they would say to the participants, "Here is a little shocking machine. We're going to shock you if you'll let us. I'll pay you $65 if you'll let me shock you." And many of the participants said, "No, that's okay. I'll pass on the $65." And the research person would say, Well, okay, but I just have to fill out some paperwork, so you're going to have to stay in this room before I can let you go. And the researcher would leave, and this was the real part of the research.
Right.
They would leave the person alone in there with that machine and no cell phone, nothing to do, no books. They were alone with their own brain. 50% of the people who were left alone in that room who had said, no, I will not be shocked for $65 when they were left alone for 15 minutes ended up shocking themselves.
Oh my gosh, that's crazy.
It is crazy. It is crazy. It probably speaks to solitary confinement and what a bad idea that
Yeah,
is for human
yeah,
brains. But it
yeah.
also speaks to our growing understanding that the inside of our own brains can be a very terrifying and
Hmm.
shaming place to be alone with. And that's my mission. How do we transform human brains so that we are kind to ourselves in there, so that they're good nests for us,
How
really
to,
become.
let's hear that again. How to transform our brains so they become kind nests.
Yeah, yeah. And then, of
Okay.
course, our life energy is freed up for all kinds of creativity, social change,
Right.
entrepreneurial energy, commitment, contribution, because we're not spending all of our time trying to make the brain turn off and trying to figure out what the heck's going to make it turn off, which, of
Mm.
course, includes other people's stories like movies and TV shows, but also includes things like alcohol. How much alcohol do we consume to turn off the brain? And other behaviors and addictions that we might experience as not being particularly good for us.
Mm-hmm.
So, including,
Mm.
of course, workaholism for those of us who are
Ding, ding, ding,
the.
ding. Any takers? Mine's more
Yeah.
busyness versus workaholism.
Just
Just,
staying busy.
yeah, just staying busy.
Yeah.
Oh. Sarah is delighted by the self compassion that arises from the understanding how language and resonance changes our brains, heals trauma, and gives us that new energy, well being, and choice that she was just talking about. And her work focuses on how we hear and understand one another, effective ways to connect hearts, and the emergence of self. And
Yes.
you say your passion is watching people's self understanding to deepen into warmth.
Yeah. That's such a nice thing.
Yeah.
And so the way this work goes, the way this work works is the reason that our brains are so difficult is because we've been left alone with them.
Mm.
So we need to learn how to accompany each other. And as soon as there's accompaniment, brains start to change in marvelous ways.
And what does that
We,
mean, accompaniment?
yeah, accompaniment means that somebody else gets a little bit of what it's like to be us. Just
Mm.
the sense of like we're not alone with it.
Mm-hmm.
And if listeners, if you are already feeling a little bit of relief just from us describing the inside of the brain that is not kind to us, that's what we're talking about. That's the beginning of this. It's the beginning of
Okay.
self-compassion. People are out there going, oh, my brain's mean to me. So many other people's brains are mean to them. This all makes sense. This is
Mm.
not just me being defective.
And is
Yeah.
that literally, I can feel the aha moment and it's incredible how uh, when people feel understood and that there's that shared experience, how that alone is what can help them to decompress a tiny bit.
Yeah, the stress system starts to relax. And
Mm.
once the stress system starts to relax, our nervous systems aren't in fight, flight, and alarmed aloneness anymore. And all of a sudden, we're popping up into our social engagement circuits. This is the work of Stephen Porges and his polyvagal theory. We pop up into social engagement and we can like look around. It's like coming out of a tank. I mean, our amygdala running things, our fear system running things. It's like we're down in the tank and we're just trying to figure out where to aim our little tank cannon. And then we kind of have this sense of safety and we start to pop up and put our head out of the tank and look around and go, oh, look, there are people out here and they're not so bad. S-
Sarah, having read a book, I think it was called the Vagal Nerve.
Mm,
I was fascinated by that. And maybe you're going to get into this later, so stop me if you are, though. There are a whole bunch of really, really simple techniques and approaches to help trigger that fight or flight, the parasympathetic sympathetic nerve. Do you want to talk about that now, or are you going to talk about that later?
Well, my main approach to this is the movement that happens when we have accompaniment. So there are like lots of kind of technical things you can do that taking cold showers changes the vagus nerve, and
That changes a
what
lot
you
of things.
eat.
It puts me into a state of misery, actually. I'm not sure I'd go for that one.
Right. What you eat changes the vagus nerve,
Mm.
how quickly you drink and what you do, it's all kinds of things change the vagus nerve. But what's most interesting to me is, how does the vagus nerve change when we have a sense that we are being warm with ourselves and understanding with
Mm.
ourselves? And how do we change others with the warmth
Mm.
and understanding as well?
Gorgeous. So one of the things we said we want to talk about today was the exploring how hard it is to receive feedback, because I can imagine that just will put the brain on a red alert, as it has for me. And what happens to people when they receive feedback, the ideal state for receiving feedback, and much more.
Yes.
So should we
Well,
dive in?
let's dive in.
Okay, good. So let's just start with that first one. And
Yeah.
maybe in some ways this is obvious, though I think you're going to give us a very comprehensive explanation that will help people understand, why is it so hard for us little human beings to receive feedback?
Well, part of the answer to this question is, how has feedback been used against us as
Yeah.
children? Yeah, yeah. I mean, adults don't even realize the way in which children are receiving feedback. They don't even, we as adults have forgotten the vulnerability and openness of a child's brain. So if a parenting person says to their kid, hey, you don't matter, you don't belong here, you're doing a horrible job, I can't believe that you're not pulling your weight. The kid is like, for the parent, this is like some kind of passing commentary. The parent gets mad, they blow up, it passes. The kid carries that with them for the rest of their lives, going, I'm a terrible person, I don't
Mm.
contribute, I don't belong, I shouldn't have been born. And so the parent doesn't even realize the impact that they're having, and the child doesn't doesn't have a sense that feedback is a positive thing. So as soon
Mhm.
as somebody says, hey, can I give you some feedback, they're back in that loop of what it was like to be little and to have somebody who had no idea what their impact was telling them what was wrong with them. And then the child self within all of us goes down into the tank and is like, okay, where do I need to aim the cannon? We got to blow this person up in order to be able to survive here. We're not going to be able to, this is not going to be a good thing. So there's no lived experience of feedback being supportive. Now, feedback as professionals is of immense interest and support, and gives us all kinds of information about how to improve what we're doing, about how what we're doing is contributing or not contributing, how to course correct, how to change our strategies in order to make things work better. But if we're down in that tank, we
Mm.
cannot tell. We cannot tell what the good stuff is and sift it out from the difficult stuff. Mm.
Oh, wow. Okay. I want to go off on a tangent for a second, and there may not be
Mm-hmm.
a fit here, though. When you were talking about childhood, and of course, my mom popped into my mind, and my one of the themes that, and I come from a large Irish Catholic family, so 7 kids, as you know. One of the themes in my childhood was there was a shaming element around watching television in the daytime.
Oh dear.
And I don't know if that's, and it's what I find humorous and amazing about it is that it seems that each one of my siblings share this, at least a couple that I've talked to recently, that shaming feeling. Is that somehow related to feedback, and how did that likely get mixed up?
Well, when you and I were young, the things that were on TV in the daytime were soap operas. So
True.
so there was a whole
Somerset.
Days of our lives. So there was a whole sort of culture and class ideas about who watches TV and who doesn't in the
Mm,
daytime, who watches soap operas, who has the time, who has the idleness, who has the being trapped at home experience, who isn't out volunteering, who
mm.
isn't running the League of Women Voters, which is what my mother did. Who isn't doing yeah. So there's that piece, and that also speaks to the kind of the way that we carry an internalization of contempt. And we can carry all kinds of different contempts that create our cultural mores about what's a good thing to do and what's a bad thing to do, what's a good way to look and what's a bad way to look. How do we look professional? How do we not look professional? How do we show up to carry out our responsibilities? How are we shirking our responsibilities?
Wow.
There's so much that just gets embedded with these funny little edges of contempt that travel through every family
Yeah.
and make different things off limits. So
Mm-hmm.
for one family, drinking caffeine is off limits. For one family, watching TV during the day is off limits. For one family, being overweight is off limits. For one family, attending church is off limits. For another family, being an atheist is off limits. It's
Yeah.
the family culture gets created with these streams of embodied communication of what is acceptable and what is not.
Wow. That I hadn't realized there was such a deep connection with the society, the culture, and class as well. You mentioned that with around
Yeah.
the daytime TV watching. Jeez. So, all right. So, coming back to feedback, what happens to people's nervous systems when they
Ooh.
receive feedback?
Yeah, in our worst case scenario, which is where we're going into the tank, the heartbeat increases, the cortisol increases. There's an anticipation of shame. Shame is the emotion that creates the greatest flow of cortisol for humans. So it is the thing we most
Say
try
that
to
again.
avoid,
Shame,
is the emotion
motion, that.
that creates the greatest flow of cortisol in human bodies.
Wow, that's why we
Yeah.
run so fast from shame. Okay.
Yeah, and from feedback, because of course we have an embodied experience of feedback being shaming.
Okay.
Yeah, and feedback separating us from our people. Like the way that feedback is so often used is to tell people what they're doing wrong,
Mm-hmm.
how they don't belong, and what they need to be doing differently in order to be able to regain their belonging, or
Yeah.
that it's hopeless and they're never going to regain their belonging, which is another way that feedback can be used.
I when I do these my courses, whether they're face to face or for the time being online, I always send an evaluation form. And whenever I get it back, even though like I can tell people are really happy and delighted and everything, there is still that sense of panic's not quite the right word, of foreboding, of fear, of dread to open the evaluation forms to read possible criticism. And I think, wow, this is crazy. After 21 years of being in business, of being wildly successful the majority of the time, it amazes me that this still can have such a grip on me and trigger such a concern about what if someone's not happy.
And vulnerability, by opening the feedback form, we're stepping into vulnerability, and we're stepping into uh, it's quite interesting, the part of the brain that creates differentiation. So the part of the brain that we need to come online to be able to offer the feedback, which says this worked, this didn't work so well, that part of the brain is inherently a non-relational part of the brain.
What part is, I didn't get that.
The brain that's capable of making differentiations. It's the
Okay.
instrumental brain. It's the non-relational brain. We have two major brain systems that are at work, and they can be roughly analogous to the hemispheres. So one of the brain systems is the get things done hemisphere.
Mm-hmm.
The get things done system runs on dopamine. likes accomplishment, likes to check off the to-do list. It's the kind of, I call it the instrumental brain, get things
Okay.
done brain. The get things done brain, when we're in there, we don't really see other people as people. We see other people as functions and roles, and they're supposed to be fulfilling their function and carrying out their responsibilities that are connected to their roles, period. There's no sense of the other person really existing as a relational being. And if we're looking at the brain and trauma and accompaniment and lack of accompaniment, then the shift into solely the instrumental brain is, it's like we are, with our evaluation forms, handing people the razors, like saying, okay, cut. And this is a part of kind of why we feel so vulnerable, why there's that little bit of dread and foreboding when we open up the evaluation forms. Even when people love us, we're handing them an instrument for their instrumental brain to differentiate and to say what really worked and what didn't work. And and the more people are integrated, the more everybody's brain is integrated, the more wonderful the world is. So the more people's instrumentality is connected to their relationality, the more wonderful their feedback is.
And now you may get into this in more detail, though. How do you connect the instrumental to the relational?
Well, there's another writer whose work I love very much. His name is Ian McGilchrist, and he talks about the hemispheres of the brain and the 100 years of split brain research that comes out of the 20th century, and the way that it shows us that each of these two different systems, the instrumental and the relational brain, or the left and the right hemisphere, see the world differently. And he brings this wonderful parable about the master and his emissary, where the master is a philosopher king, and he's thinking about what's best for his country. And he has a servant who goes out and manifests what he wants. And this is the best possible way for the country to be run, for the philosopher king to have really good ideas, and for the decisions to be made based on those. And the worst way for the country to be run is for the philosopher king not to have any input at all, and for the emissary to figure everything out based on profit for himself. And that's sort of our brains in a way. So that's a very quick parable of instrumental and relational. We need the philosopher king within all of us to be alive and contributing.
So for me, it's still somewhat conceptual, and I think it's going to be so exciting to take it to the next level of detail. In a couple of minutes, we're going to take a break. So let's cover a little bit more around the feedback, and then we'll move into the other more concrete approaches that you may offer us. My next question for you then, you talked about what happens to people's nervous systems. What are some of the most common reactions to feedback?
Panic, overwhelm, lack of desire to see it, defensiveness. This is our worst case scenario. Of course, this is us inside of our tanks. Battening down the hatches, not looking, not reading, not taking in, not hearing, feeling immense shame, beating ourselves up without even being able to tell what the other person is saying, catastrophizing.
Yeah. And I have, I'm sure listeners will be able to relate to this. Sometimes when I'm anticipating negative feedback, like one time I read an email from a friend and I was like, oh man, she just ripped into me, and it was pretty horrible. And then for some reason I decided to just, read it again, because I don't know, I wanted to torture myself some more or something. And Sarah, lo and behold, what I read in her email was not what she wrote. I had so gone in with a pretext, assumptions about her what she was going to say, and that it was going to be bad and it was going to be critical, that my brain couldn't actually read the actual
Yeah.
words.
Yeah, this is our nervous system. It's predisposed to decode everything as hostility when we're inside the tank. Yep, we're
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
yeah.
Fascinating.
Hmm.
So we have time for maybe one more question before we go to break.
Okay.
What are some unconscious contracts? And maybe we need to explain like what an unconscious contract is and how they're connected to feedback. Do you
Yeah,
need more than a minute to explain an
I do.
unconscious
I
contract?
need more. I need a little more than a minute. Yeah, for that one. But just to put it very quickly, an unconscious contract is an agreement we make with ourselves that we don't even know about that sets us up, in this case, to receive feedback with a great deal of defensiveness. And that what you were touching when you read your letter with your predisposed ideas was you were touching an unconscious contract. Yeah, to
And I,
possibly believe the worst about yourself, or
yeah,
to believe that people would believe the worst about you.
you and I have done work around unconscious contracts and I find them fascinating. What are two or three examples of an unconscious contract that people make with themselves?
I will be I will be the very best employee. I will be the very best employee, or the very best child, or the very best person in order to be included and to belong. I will never make any mistakes in order to have a place, no matter the cost to myself. The problem with these is that they're so rigid that then you
Yeah.
can't receive the feedback because you have a contract not to make any mistakes. So you have to demolish the person who's you have to kill the messenger in order to survive the feedback experience.
Yeah. So I like how you say that they're so extreme and rigid and unbending. It's not a bad thing to say, I want to be the best employee. It's um, not make mistakes at, how do you say it at the end, the cost to myself?
No matter the cost to myself.
No matter the cost to myself. That is always the phrase for me that I find almost bone chilling. No matter the cost to myself. All right, so let's pause here. We're going to pick it up when we come back. And listeners, if you want to connect with Sarah, find out more about Sarah, you can go directly to her website, sarahpeyton.com. And that's SarahPeyton.com. You can also check out her book, yourresonantself.com, or you can check out Sarah's videos on YouTube, Sarah Peyton on YouTube. When we come back from break, we'll hear more from Sarah. Stay tuned. You're listening to Partner Up with Amy Carroll on the Voice America Business Channel. Welcome back to Partner Up with Amy Carroll. My guest today is Sarah Peyton. We've been discussing why it's so hard to receive feedback and what happens to people when they receive feedback. Before the break, we were talking about unconscious contracts. So Sarah, I want to turn it back over to you and pick it up from there.
Yes. So these unconscious contracts we touched on, the idea that we would have a contract never to make a mistake. Never making a mistake is the most is a contract that hinders us the most in trying to receive feedback. Because as we said, if we have to be perfect, then we don't get to have slipped in any way. We don't get to we don't get to course correct if we're perfect. And we don't get to course correct if we have a contract to be perfect, which means, of course, that we have to go down into our little tank turret and shoot everybody with the big cannon in order to make them go away, killing the messenger.
Sarah,
Yeah.
let me check with you though, because I don't perceive, and you know me, and feel free to just give your opinion if you think what I'm saying is a bunch of malarkey. I don't see myself as a perfectionist, and yet, as you know, you and I both know, having worked together, worked with you, that I have created, like many people do, my own unconscious contracts. So, people who are, is it accurate to say that people who are not perfectionists also create these unconscious contracts? It's the unconscious contract that is so rigid and unreasonable that it's as if you have to be
Yes.
perfect. Is that it?
Yes. I'd like to just take us into the realm of intimate relationships for a little moment. Yes. So even if we don't have a contract to be perfect, we can have a contract never to hurt our partner.
Mm.
And so if we have a contract, I will never hurt my partner, in order to live in integrity with my deepest values for not harming, no matter the cost to myself. Then if we're having an intimate connection and their partner says ouch, then all of a sudden the contract is broken. And then
Hmm.
there's this tremendous shame, like crashing shame comes in, because not because the person has made a mistake, not because they're perfectionist, but because they really honestly do not want to hurt anybody ever. And it can lead to, I've worked with many couples where this contract has led to decades of no physical intimacy.
Holy smokes.
Holy smokes, which shows us that there are all kinds of contracts that are made in the very best of intentions
Right.
that lead to an inability to receive feedback. So,
Mm.
for each person, if you know you have difficulty receiving feedback, the best way to do it is to kind of dig into it a little bit and say, solemnly swear to my essential self that I will not, and then see what comes out. Make a mistake. I will not be a bad person. I will not, um, I will not cry. I will not show my emotions. I will not acknowledge my vulnerabilities. Yeah, and then
Okay,
the
let's say it
next
again.
part.
I solemnly swear to my essential self, and then
Yes,
see what
that I
comes.
will, yeah, and that I will not, or that I will always, or I will never, and see what's there. And then the next part is in order to. Now, with the in order to, we often think that we know why we're doing something. But the whole thing about an unconscious contract is that it's unconscious. We don't actually
Right.
know why we're doing it. Otherwise, we wouldn't do it anymore. We would go, oh, that's a silly idea.
Hmm.
But we don't actually know why.
Mm.
So we have to look at it more deeply, and we can use the words in order to, and then we pause and you close your eyes and you're just like going with whatever comes. Like, I will never make a mistake. And now we want to think not just of ourselves, but we want to think about who this contract is connected to. So I will never make a mistake in order to be safe. People often say that. But we need to go a little farther. We need to know who we need to be safe from.
Hmm.
I will never make a mistake in order to be safe from the humiliation that my father dishes out whenever a mistake is made in our family.
Mm.
Now we're starting to touch something that we weren't walking around thinking about because we're 50 years old. And we're like, my father has been dead for 10 years and I'm not thinking about him anymore. And we don't realize that we're carrying these old relationships within us. So we go,
Hmm.
okay, I will not make a mistake in order to make sure my father doesn't kill me with his sarcasm. And then we go, whoa, okay, now that really lands for me. I can feel that. And actually, that does sound a little silly now, given that he is dead. And I release myself from this contract. I revoke this vow. Like there's a formality to the process that lets our bodies and our brains know, hey, this is serious. And we get to let go of it. We get to look at things and say, is this really what I want? But we
Hmm.
can't look at them and say, is this really what I want? If we're stopping at, I will not make a mistake in order to be safe. We have to know what we're safe from, what we're
Got it.
trying to be safe from.
Sarah, the example you give, it helps to to see a little of the humor or the silliness in it, like you said, because in that example, the father has already died. So of course, you've got no responsibilities. What are some examples that it's harder for people to give up the unconscious contract? Or do you find people are torn?
Oh, all the time. People get so torn. They listen to this process and they think that's just easy and silly and it's just people saying words. But then they get into it and you say, you want to release this contract? And they go, no, this is a very good contract for me. This is making me safe. I will not make a mistake in order to survive humiliation and ridicule. I'm not going to give this up, they'll
Mm.
say. Yeah, this is someone I'm going to hold on to. I don't want to make any mistakes. You can sort of hear, and this takes us into our next very important concept. You can sort of hear the buzziness around those words. I'm not going to give this up.
Yeah.
And you can tell that something really bad has happened.
Yeah, you're talking trauma, yeah?
Yeah, I'm talking trauma. I'm
Okay.
talking moments where we were really alone with a bad thing, and our amygdala said to us, we will never let that
Mhm.
happen again. And
Yeah.
that's part of unconscious contracts, is the moments of trauma. That's why we make them, because we
Mm.
were horribly alone with somebody, somewhere, sometime, either alone in terms of being all alone with somebody in a room and it was really scary and they were humiliating or shaming us, or being alone in a room full of people, like in a classroom with a teacher where we're surrounded by a bunch of kids who are laughing at us and the teacher's making fun of us. And
Mhm.
that's also terribly alone, even though we're in a room full of people, because
Yeah.
nobody is with us.
Yeah.
We are exquisitely social beings, and
Mhm.
we are so attuned to whether or not people are with us.
Yeah.
There's so many markers in our nervous system and that tell us whether or not somebody's with us.
It's Sarah, it's extraordinary, and it seems to me, being 57 and a half, that we don't outgrow that.
No, we don't outgrow that at all. We
Mhm.
have in our skin, we have sensors that are particularly made for body to feel body warmth. They're
Wow.
not the sensors that light up. They're not the thermoreceptors that light up when it's too hot or we've sat next to a radiator or we need to move away from the fire or we're too cold. It's an entirely different set of thermoreceptors that are targeting body heat. We need body heat. We need body warmth. We need to know that our neurobiology is a social neurobiology and our culture is a solitary culture.
Mm.
And there's
Yeah.
a clash
Yeah.
between our culture and our neurobiology.
Mm.
Yeah.
Eh, You know, what I'm imagining when you're saying that we're social, I think about now with so many of us walking around wearing masks, what I find is sometimes people then disconnect from the eye contact too.
Yeah.
That somehow they think that if I don't look at the person, I'm helping reduce, the transmission of COVID or the reception of COVID. And like, no, people, we can still have eye contact. That's so far, that's still really safe. And it's amazing to me how what a little buzz of energy I get. This might be because my temperature receptors are being recognized. I don't know. Though the just walking down the street, passing a stranger and having a little moment of connection. Like the other day, it was a little girl who was singing to herself, and it was just
Oh.
so entertaining to watch. And she was on her bicycle, and I could just see that I was having joy watching her. And then when she looked up at me, and the connection we had, and I thought it's crazy how something so
Mm.
simple and so fleeting can give so much joy.
And nourish you.
Yeah,
Yes, how beautiful.
yeah.
Just in the last month, I've gotten so tired of the COVID isolation that I've taken to actually asking people's names when I'm out walking. And I walk my dog and they have a dog and I'm like, and what's your dog's name? And what's your name? Which was not my habit before all of this.
You'll take whatever you can get.
That's right. That's right.
Before we go back into the discussion around feedback, do you have any more like tidbits or suggestions around the struggles that so many of us are dealing with the isolation of COVID?
Well, I love what Stephen Porges says, which is to get used to the reality that our energy is streaming into the video screens when we're on Zoom and we're with people, that we're not just downloading like it was a movie, that we're in relationship. And to just find, like you're finding the relationship in eye contact, also to let ourselves feel energetically that we're with people, even though we're separated
Mm,
and connecting via video screens, to let ourselves feel our togetherness
yeah,
instead of thinking that it's just a one-way download, like watching a Hollywood movie, that we're actually, this is our lives.
yeah,
We're in this. This is
yeah.
for us, and we're participating.
That's reassuring to me because the leadership is going to do a little publicity here for my leadership program, the online course. One of the skills I'm teaching people is something called a beach ball. And symbolically, the use of that word to connect and engage with people, sometimes complete strangers, immediately. And it's providing exactly what you've just described. It's building that, energetic connection, even just, something that is um, simple and playful.
Yes, simple and playful and doable, but also just, like it's part of this whole thing about self-warmth that that makes self-warmth so important when we're talking about trauma, when we're talking about unconscious contracts. What's really key for us is to begin to turn toward ourselves with warmth, which of course we can have unconscious contracts against doing. So we need to
Mm.
start to release those unconscious
What
contracts.
would be an example of an unconscious contract people have against self-worth?
Yeah, one example would be I will not, there's so many, I will not be warm with myself in order to make my mother right, in order to make sure my mother gets to be right about me.
Mm, mm.
I will not be warm with myself in order to um, keep from being keep from moving into anticipation and hope that others will be warm with me in order to keep myself safe from disappointment and heartbreak.
Uh-huh. Yep.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. I will not be warm with myself in order to fit into my family system where nobody is warm with themselves.
Because then you
uh,
become an outsider
yeah,
and you don't
exactly.
belong anymore.
Yeah. Yeah, I will not be warm with myself in order to keep myself safe from others' sarcasm and humiliation and ridicule.
Mm,
Yeah, yeah,
wow.
yeah. All
What
kinds of these.
what would be I'm thinking of something, I don't know if it's an unconscious contract. I won't be warm with myself. Um, it's like it's the what I come across with some of my coachees is they don't want to be too gentle or nice on themselves with themselves because they think that that means they're going to become a couch potato.
Right. Yes, that's a very important one.
Okay, so
Yes.
I won't be warm with myself in order to avoid becoming lazy or
Or depressed,
Mhm,
or dissolving into goo, or losing my motivation, or
mhm.
all kinds of things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, so these unconscious contracts have good intentions.
They have such good intentions. They always want to save our lives and make us safe and keep us safe from being disappointed and keep us safe from being humiliated and help us belong in our family systems and in our cultural systems.
Mm,
Yeah. And that message that self-warmth equates to a loss of all motivation comes from very deep cultural roots. It comes from roots that go into the Bible, into the Christian church. It comes from roots that are embedded in the world of capitalism, of working hard for our money. They come from the family roots of um, of family cultures about survival, families that have lived through famine and war, and where it's dangerous that in family history and social and cultural and world history, it's been dangerous to relax even for a moment, that we must stay vigilant in order to survive. There are so many very important uh, efforts that our unconscious contracts are making to
yeah.
keep us safe and keep us alive. But the problem with them is that we don't realize that self warmth is actually the thing that makes us most resilient and most powerful, because it lets, we come back to that parable of the master and the emissary, it
Okay.
lets our philosopher king have the reins. It
Mhm.
lets our philosopher king say, okay, um, what's really important to me is making sure that that every voice matters. How are we going to do that? Emissary within the self. How are we going to set up our community our company meeting? How are we going to structure this so that everybody has input? What are we thinking about the structure of our company? Does it provide the access to creativity that we want to be supporting in this company? All of those questions are the questions that are asked by our inner philosopher kings. And our inner philosopher kings are bolstered by, it's like they're sitting on a throne of self-warmth. It's like
Mm.
that is that's what gives them the possibility of relaxing and resting enough to be able to see, what are my most important values? Are they being reflected in the way I run my department? Are they being reflected in the way, in the mission statement of the company that I've created? How can I bring my values into what I'm creating and doing in the world?
Oh, that's gorgeous. Uh, Um, Before I ask you my last question around feedback, I'm curious to know if there was anything else that you wanted to share about self-warmth or unconscious contracts or anything else
I
that,
want to share, yeah, I
yeah.
want to share that people who have self warmth look like they are self reliant and independent. That's how, because they're carrying within them both their own self warmth and they're
Mhm.
carrying within them their community's warmth for them. And so they're moving into the world with a confidence. And from the outside, because when we look at people, we don't see their community embedded within them.
Yeah.
We think, oh, this person is really independent. They're
Hmm.
really competent. They're really focused. They get a lot done. They have kindness and they're so independent. That's what I want to be. I want to be self reliant and independent too. But we don't realize that that person has this entire embedded community and this entire embedded warmth. So it's strange because self-warmth is invisible in many ways. And so
Yeah.
what we're modeling ourselves on is systems that have an invisible component that we are not quite seeing. And once we begin to realize, oh, there's self warmth in this system, that's why it works so well, then we start to kind of tear down those ideas that your clients, that my clients, that so many people in the world have, that if they move towards self warmth, they're going to become a couch potato.
Yeah.
It starts to take that idea apart, that self-warmth is something different than total what's that word for when you give permission to everything, when you don't, when you have no boundaries and no
A free-for-all.
yeah, exactly, yeah, yeah, a free-for-all into couch potato dumb.
um, as you were speaking, I'd be curious to know if you've ever been asked this question before. What was popping up for me, Sarah, is who, if anyone, is an excellent role model or a role model of excellence for self-warmth?
Mm.
Are there people out there who maybe listeners would know?
Well, I love what we see in the world of relational neuroscience. I love seeing the way that learning about relational neuroscience changes the people who learn about it. So I love seeing how people like Stephen Porges have been changed by their research, how people like Bonnie Badenoch have been changed by their experiences with a deeper understanding of self-compassion and
Can you give
trauma.
a description of one of them, that what their transformation looked like?
Matthew Lieberman started out very driven. He's a UCLA neuroscientist, very driven, tons of beautiful articles. And then as he started doing his work, he started to realize how important family was.
Mm.
And the Russians tried to hire him with a huge contract to bring him to Moscow and do enormous neuroscience work with just like the hugest budget and everything he could possibly want. And he looked at their offer and he thought, oh, but my family is so important. And he decided not to take this really lucrative and status filled offer in order to be able to stay with his family and continue his life
Mm.
embedded in his community. So these are the kinds of choices we see people making as their philosopher king becomes empowered by the
Hmm.
research
Hmm.
and the information that you and I are talking about today.
And this guy didn't become a couch potato. He just found balance and was able to regenerate himself with the self warmth of his
Yeah,
family.
yeah. And he still writes beautiful articles and
Mm.
does beautiful research, and they're all about relationship. His work goes deep, more and more deeply into relational exploration.
Sarah, we only have a few minutes left, though I want to just check if there's anything else you want to say about the ideal state of for receiving feedback.
The ideal state for receiving feedback is to be out of our tank, is to be is to
Got it.
pop ourselves up and to look around and to let all our unconscious contracts that we have not yet had a chance to release be part of the tank and go, yes, of course you're here, honeys. And now we can listen to our friend who's sending in an email, or our boss who has some ideas about how to do things differently, or a coworker who's experiencing frustration, and really listen with the ears of the philosopher king
Mm.
to what are the deep longings and needs? How does this align with mission? How does this feedback help me reorient and course correct? So that's what we're really looking for.
Gorgeous. And I want to already move into a call for action for listeners. Now, listeners, what Sarah's work is juicy, it's powerful, it's incredibly rewarding. So, my first call for action to you is to download or to pre order, rather, her book, the workbook, which is your resonance self workbook. And you can find that on Amazon directly, or you can go to Sarah's website, which is sarahpeyton.com, or you can go directly to the yourresonantself.com website. And Sarah, well, let me turn it over to you. With the time remaining, what would be one call for action you have for listeners?
Well, if you're starting to get intrigued by this world that is a combination of neuroscience and relationality, and how the heck do we use language in ways that support making brains a really cozy place to live, you will love the upcoming Resonance Summit, which is happening March 18 to 21st. It's free. You can sign up on the website, sarahpeyton.com, and we're going to have uh, some of these neuroscientists that I've been referencing in our talk today. Stephen Porges is speaking for us. Deb
Wonderful.
Dana, his great interpreter, is speaking for us. Bonnie Badenoch will be speaking for us, a gorgeous voice on trauma and relationship. And Ruth Lanius, who talks about the ways in which PTSD affects the brain, and how healing work changes PTSD patterns.
Wow. Okay. So that's a summit coming up in a couple of weeks, and they can find that on your website.
Yes, they can.
Wonderful. And listeners, my second call for action, if you want to send me your communication conundrums, clashes, challenges, mishaps, and blunders and successes, feel free to drop me an email at amy@carrollcoaching.com, or reach out to me on social media. I'll be discussing them on future shows. If you're ready to take your superhero partner powers into the next decade, you can join me for my online leadership presence course, and you can check that out on my website, carrollcoaching.com. Now, be sure to tune in next week, because that's when I'm going to be addressing some of these communication challenges that some of you have written in about. And I'm going to be doing this with my amazing social media woman, Talitha Wazel, and we're going to be having a rich discussion with that. Also, if you're game for more, I'm going to be hopping over to Facebook Live 5 minutes past the hour for a short chat on today's show. Sarah, thank you. It's been an absolutely wonderful conversation.
Thank you, Amy. A pleasure to be with you.
And thank you, listeners. You've been listening to Partner Up with Amy Carroll on the Voice America Business Channel. Happy partnering, everyone.